19, I got my MD, and then I got my PhD when I was 22.
George is a gifted neuroscientist, but his work is heavily guarded by the Soviet state. And in 1976, he decides to leave.
I received an invitation, a visa from the United States to continue my work to Yale University.
George's wife, Nino, studying to become a chemist, would join him later.
I know that it was good for him. I knew he had to go, and I had to follow him.
But George's dreams and his destiny are on a collision course.
All papers were prepared, passport, pictures were taken, and I already had my foreign passport in my pocket. I was ready to leave for New York, to fly from Tbilisi, Georgia to Moscow, and from Moscow to New York. My wife was coming to meet me in airport. When I was standing on the sidewalk waiting for cab stop there, and suddenly this red car jumps on the sidewalk, and then it hits me.
Before anyone can help him, George dies on the stairs of the Tbilisi Theater. Then how can he possibly come alive 3 days later on the autopsy table? Find out when Beyond Human Limits returns. Lies dead, the victim of a hit and run. But George Rodinia believes his mind lived on.
I felt absolute nothingness. I felt limbo. I felt that I am nowhere and I am not, but at the same time I am.
I was in the airport when I heard the news. They took me more than 1 hour before I get to hospital. They told me he was dead. I went in his room. I stayed there with his body. I talked to him. It was unbelievable.
September 14th, 1976. George is officially declared dead.
Certificate of death. Citizen Rodinei Atsotny Grigorievich. Died at the age of 20 years old.
His body is transferred to the morgue of Tbilisi Hospital number 8, where it takes a Soviet medical bureaucracy several days to arrange an autopsy. Standard procedure after a sudden death.
What happened to me was death. But I understood that death does not exist. And I started praying all my life. And I am watching something which is impossible in any description, and it exists. I was there.
George's body cools in the morgue.
All the scientific thoughts which were given to me by universities were nothing. They disappeared. There is no time. There is no distance. And then I see a lot of bubbles around me. They are chaotic. And then I see neutrons, protons, electrons divided into particles, particles divided into another parts, and then this all created oneness. And this oneness was beautiful existence.
Like the thousands of other documented cases of the near-death phenomenon, George experiences what is known as the life review process.
And then I saw my parents. They were political prisoners, and in 1956, when they were given allowance to go back to Moscow, they were arrested, and I see how they were killed. Then I saw my wife. She was crying. She was thinking that she was still young and she was already a widow.
George has no sense of time, but it is 3 days since George was certified dead.
And I saw that I'm taken from morgue. They washed me in a warm water and defrosted me. And they put me on this special table for autopsy. In a blink of the eye, the energy pushed me into the body when I never, ever wanted to go back. And I opened my eyes. He saw the pupils, and he said, "Oh my God, there is life." And then they took me back to hospital. And I have headache, I'm cold, my lungs are collapsed.
If it is a surprise for George to be alive, it is an absolute shock to those performing the autopsy. Scientists who study the brain can only speculate how George survived.
We have to say that the cold protected him from the usual process in which the cells lose energy and then start destroying themselves. Now, if you take that view, then you have to argue that the brain went into some form of suspended animation. What the brain could not have done during that time is create consciousness.
Still, it's not proof that George's consciousness acted independently of his brain.
One of the things when I debate people about near-death experiences as to whether or not they're just complex hallucinations of a traumatized brain, which is what I believe they are, or they really are evidence that consciousness separates for some time and has access to other founts of knowledge or something like that. There's another interesting quirk of human psychology called cryptomnesia, which is the fact that we can acquire information and then forget that we've acquired it. And it comes back in trauma situations like the ones we're discussing here.
According to Beierstein, George experienced cryptomnesia. As a child, he had probably overheard word of his parents' death, and in a state of shock, repressed it.
3 days later, I was at home. Somebody told me on the phone that he's alive.
George's experience was carefully documented before the breakup of the Soviet Union. But when the Republic of Georgia gained independence in 1991, many Soviet records in Georgia were destroyed. But at the Institute of Psychiatry in London, researchers asked the question, how is it possible for someone to remember his own death? Their studies point to the astonishing possibility that the mind may indeed live on after the brain is dead.
We set out 2 years ago to look at cardiac arrests and to see whether or not those patients who had a cardiac arrest, whether they developed near-death experiences. Of that group, about 6 to 7% have true near-death experiences. The significance of the study is that if the experiences were truly occurring when the patient was unconscious, when all his brainstem function had gone, so this raises the possibility that mind may in fact exist independent of the brain.
But for critics of the near-death phenomena, the explanation must exist inside our brains. That somehow traumatized, they go into a state of suspended animation. The brain is still functioning. We just have no way of detecting that function.
Paralytic shellfish poisoning in Japan has been known to do this to a lot of people, and there's even a change in the law there that says you don't embalm the body of somebody whose death has presumably occurred due to this kind of shellfish poisoning for several days, just in case it may wear off and they may come back. I won't say we have the answers to all the questions yet. That would be foolish. Of course we don't. But I think there is ample evidence to believe that the brain is the organ of mind and that mental processes are very unlikely to exist independently of functioning brains.
But for neuroscientists who believe they are just beginning to understand the complexity of death, the possibilities are compelling.
And I hope that near-death experiences will lead us to the fact that consciousness may not actually be in the brain, but may be in some way a function of the universe, if you like, outside the brain. And that would be one of the greatest discoveries that we can have. There's a Nobel Prize waiting for somebody there.
It took George 9 months to recover in hospital. But when he was released, he was not the same man. His interest turned from the study of science to theology. And in 1989, Nino and George and their 2 children finally arrived in the United States. Today, George teaches theology at Lamar University in Texas and is a pastor at a country church.
I cannot claim something which I don't know. I'm telling what I experienced. Now, people call it near-death experience. I call it out-of-body experience, because I could see my body. Only way to be explained is that it is life after life, and there is no death.